It wasn't a big deal at first. I should have seen it coming, though, in hindsight, but the truth is, I wasn't expecting this. He wasn't supposed to do this. Not to me. I'd known Mark for over a decade. We met in college, and while we were polar opposites in many ways, we balanced each other out. I was the steady by-the-book type, the kind of guy who'd rather save a penny than spend one recklessly. Mark? He was the wild card, the spontaneous risk-taker, the guy who lived on the edge and made decisions in the heat of the moment. We'd been through a lot together. Friendship, late nights, countless beers, and bad decisions, and we always had each other's backs. That's why when he called me one night asking for a favor, I didn't hesitate. "Hey man, I need your help." Mark's voice crackled over the phone. He sounded stressed, which was unlike him. "I need you to co-sign a loan for me. It's a personal thing, nothing major, just some money for a business venture I'm getting into. You know how these things are. I just need the credit boost." Now, I'll admit it was a little strange. Mark was always a bit secretive about his financial ventures, often disappearing for months and then popping up with some new side hustle that had made him a small fortune, or so he said. But we were friends, and in my mind, this was just another one of those temporary situations that I'd help him out with. Besides, I trusted him. We'd been through so much together. "What's the loan for?" I asked, trying to gauge the seriousness of it. "A few things. A car, some debts, but mostly for this startup I'm working on. It's a pretty good investment, I promise." I wouldn't ask if I wasn't sure. I hesitated for a moment, but then I remembered all the times Mark had been there for me. I wasn't going to say no. "All right, I'll do it. You know I've got your back." I could hear the relief in his voice. "I knew I could count on you, man. Thanks." The next day, Mark sent over the paperwork. The loan was nothing too complicated. $15,000. Co-signed for a personal loan. I didn't give it much thought. I signed the papers, sent them back, and the deal was done. That was it. Or so I thought. A week passed. I didn't hear from him. A few days after that, I started to get uneasy. Mark wasn't one to ghost people, especially not me. I called him, sent him messages, nothing. I started getting a sinking feeling in my gut, but I still pushed it down. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he just needed some time. Then the unexpected happened. I started receiving letters. They weren't just any letters. They were collection notices. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. I called the lender to ask about the loan. Maybe there was an error. I figured it would be a simple misunderstanding. But when I spoke to the representative, my stomach dropped. "Your loan has gone into default," the agent said bluntly. "There's been no payment in over 2 weeks. The outstanding balance is $15,000 and it's now overdue. We're escalating it to collections." Wait, what? I was shaking now. I thought I was co-signing a loan for Mark. "What's going on?" The agent paused for a moment, then clarified. "The loan was taken out in your name as a co-signer. The terms were clear. If the primary borrower doesn't pay, the responsibility falls on you." I felt a cold rush of panic. This couldn't be happening. I had co-signed a loan to help my friend for a business venture he promised would be successful, and now I was being told it was overdue. I immediately called Mark again, but still nothing. No response, not a word. Days turned into weeks. Every call went unanswered. Every message left without a reply. I began to wonder if something had happened to him. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like something else was at play here. And that's when the truth hit me. Mark wasn't just ignoring me. He had vanished. I sat there in my apartment staring at the stack of letters. It didn't make sense. Mark wouldn't just disappear, not without a word. We'd been through too much. There had to be something I was missing. I pulled up the loan documents again, scanning through the fine print. As I went through the terms, my heart stopped. There was something hidden in the agreement, a clause I hadn't noticed before, a clause that would come back to haunt me. The signature line. I had thought it was just the usual formalities, but as I looked closer, I realized that I had signed not only as a co-signer on the loan, but also as a co-signer on something else. An agreement that would tie me into a much bigger deal than I had ever anticipated. It was then that I understood the full extent of what had been done. Mark hadn't just asked me to co-sign a loan. He had left me with a signature on something far more dangerous. something I would need to act on quickly if I wanted to make it out in one piece. Hi, I'm Chris Turner, and this is how my friend Mark tricked me into co-signing not just a loan, but my entire future. The shock was still sinking in when I sat down to examine the documents again. The loan was the first part of it, the easy part, the part I could understand. But that second signature, the one I'd brushed off without a second thought, that's where things got complicated. I knew I had signed it, but I hadn't thought it would be anything serious. Mark was my friend, and he assured me that it was all just paperwork, nothing to worry about. But now, staring at it, the dread began to take over. The document was a partnership agreement in my name for a business venture I had never agreed to. My signature was on it, but the terms were clear. I was legally bound to a company that didn't even exist yet, the company that Mark had apparently started without telling me anything about it. I quickly ran my eyes over the details, my mind racing. It was all written in the same language, vague, generic terms that any lawyer would recognize as binding, but that anyone with limited legal knowledge might miss entirely. The business was listed under Mark's name, with a clause saying that I would serve as a silent partner, which meant I was entitled to a share of the profits, but also responsible for any debts or liabilities that came with it. I felt a sickening wave of panic. How had I signed this without noticing? And more importantly, why had Mark made sure I co-signed this without telling me? As my eyes ran over the document again, I noticed that it wasn't just about the business. There were additional references to personal assets that were apparently tied to the deal, my personal assets. They'd used my name to secure funding. The business was in debt, and I was unknowingly tied to the loan and the risk that came with it. My stomach churned. Mark had set me up. Not only had he dragged me into his personal loan without my full understanding, but he'd also entangled me in a deal that was now coming back to haunt me. And worse yet, he was nowhere to be found. I tried to call the bank to clarify what I had signed, but the responses I got were less than helpful. They only confirmed that the documents I had signed were legitimate, that my name was tied to both, the loan and the business venture, and that as far as they were concerned, I was responsible for everything now. They couldn't tell me anything about the business itself or Mark's involvement in it. They didn't know where he was, either. They just confirmed that, legally, I was bound by the agreements he'd drafted and left me to clean up the mess. TT. Silence from Mark was deafening. Days turned into weeks and still nothing. The mounting pressure felt like a vice around my chest. Every missed call from creditors, every warning letter, every ominous email I received sent me further down a rabbit hole of dread. I had no idea how deep this was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I was being dragged into a nightmare I couldn't escape from. I needed to find Mark. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let this go unanswered. I started digging through his life the way you would go through the contents of a drawer you never opened, methodically, without leaving anything untouched. I tracked down his old contacts, checked through his social media accounts, even reached out to people I never thought I'd have to talk to. It didn't take long before I found a lead. One of Mark's old friends, Jason, had some answers. I caught up with him at a local bar hoping to pry some information. Jason was hesitant at first, but after a few drinks and some prodding, he finally opened up. "Man, you've got no idea what Mark's gotten himself into," he said, shaking his head. "He's been talking about big deals, investments, these shady things he's been setting up for months." I didn't know the details, but I knew something wasn't right. I leaned in, eager for any scrap of information. "What do you mean? Do you know where he is? Why isn't he answering his phone?" Jason took another sip of his beer, eyeing me like he wasn't sure how much to reveal. "I don't know exactly where he is, but I do know he's in trouble. He got involved in some high-risk investments, ones that didn't work out as planned. The kind of stuff that would have him running for the hills. And those loans you co-signed? Yeah, they're part of the mess." I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean? What's really going on?" Jason lowered his voice. "Mark has been working with some pretty dangerous people. They don't play nice. And the business he started, it wasn't just for him. You were dragged in as a fall guy, man. He knew he could get you to co-sign for the loan, make it look like it was legit, and then when things went south, he'd vanish. I froze. The weight of Jason's words crashed over me. I had been used. Mark hadn't just asked for a simple favor. He had planned this. I had been dragged into a mess with no way out, and I had no idea how deep it went. But it wasn't just the business or the loan anymore. I had to face the fact that Mark had betrayed me, not just as a friend, but as a partner in a scheme that I hadn't agreed to. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice tense with urgency. "Do you know where he went?" Jason shook his head. "No one does, but he's got some people on his tail. And trust me, when it all goes down, it won't be pretty. You need to be careful." I sat back, my mind racing. I wasn't just dealing with a loan anymore, this was bigger than that. Mark's vanishing act wasn't a coincidence. It was part of a bigger, far more dangerous game. And now, I was stuck, in the middle of it. Jason's words echoed in my head long after I left the bar. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mark, the guy I thought of as a brother, had planned this. He hadn't just dragged me into a financial mess. He had used me as leverage in something much darker. The loan, the business, the missing pieces. It was all starting to make sense in the worst possible way. I needed answers. I needed to understand exactly what I was involved in before it was too late. The next morning, I went back to the loan, documents and the partnership agreement. Going over them for the 100th time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. Every word felt like it had been carefully designed to mislead, to make me think. This was just a harmless favor for a friend, but it was far from that. I spent hours looking up the business name on every platform I could think of. It wasn't registered anywhere. No business license, no online presence, nothing. But there was one link that caught my eye. A local news article. It was dated 2 months before I signed the agreement. The headline read, "Local entrepreneur's startup attracts heavy investment, mysterious backers involved." My stomach churned as I clicked the link, praying it wouldn't be another dead end. The article was brief, but it confirmed something I hadn't expected. Mark's business was connected to a much larger, much riskier network of investors. There were vague mentions of international dealings, shady backers, and unregulated markets. The kind of places you didn't want to get involved with. I read through it, my mind racing, and then I froze. It was a name I recognized, a name that sent a chill down my spine. The article mentioned a group called Harbinger Investments. I had heard that name before, in hushed tones in the back rooms of business deals that no one wanted to touch. Harbinger was known for operating in the gray areas, taking on ventures that were too volatile for legitimate firms. There were rumors, whispers about them having connections in both the legal and illegal sides of business, but no one ever spoke about them openly. I had no idea how deep Mark had gone into their operations, but now I understood why he had disappeared. This wasn't just a bad investment gone wrong. This was a tangled mess of dangerous players, and I was in way over my head. I needed to find Mark. I needed him to explain what the hell had happened. But I had no idea where to start. Every contact I had, every lead I followed, led to a dead end. Mark had erased himself from everyone's life, and the deeper I dug, the more it felt like I was walking into something bigger than I was prepared for. I spent the next few days tracking down people who might know something. Old associates, former business partners of Mark's. Some of them wouldn't even talk to me. Others, when I mentioned Harbinger, grew visibly nervous and refused to say anything. The pressure was mounting. The creditors were calling me every day. The company's debts tied to my name were starting to pile up. If I didn't act soon, I'd lose everything. My savings, my property, my reputation, and I had no idea how to fix it. Then came the unexpected call. It was late at night when the number flashed across my screen. Unknown, with a New York area code. My heart skipped a beat as I answered it. "This is Chris Turner," I said, trying to sound calm. A low voice responded, one I didn't recognize, but it was cold and businesslike. "Mr. Turner, you don't know me, but we need to talk about Mark." I didn't say anything. My pulse was racing. "You're mixed up in something much bigger than you realize," the voice continued. "I know you've been looking for him. I've been watching you, Chris, and I think you're finally ready to understand what's really going on. but you need to meet with me. We need to discuss how you're going to get out of this mess." I felt my stomach drop. The voice on the other end of the line wasn't just some casual advisor. It felt like a warning. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows exactly how deep Mark's involvement goes," the voice replied. "And now you're involved too. If you want out, you need to be smart. Meet me tomorrow. We'll talk." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone, my mind racing. Who was this person? Why would they be helping me? Was this another trap? Another layer to the tangled mess Mark had dragged me into? But I didn't have time to second guess. I was running out of options, and the clock was ticking. The debt wasn't going to wait. The creditors wouldn't stop calling. I needed answers. And fast. I had no idea who I was meeting or what would come of it. But it was clear that this was the turning point. The time to hesitate was over. I had to take a leap into the unknown. Trust that I could outsmart whoever was playing this game with me and somehow find a way to regain control of my life. The next day I barely slept. My mind raced in circles, thinking of the possible outcomes. Who could this person be? Was it someone involved with Harbinger? Had Mark been in deeper than I'd ever imagined? I couldn't help but feel like I was stepping into a trap. But I had no choice. The meeting was my only chance to get to the bottom of this mess. I arrived at the rendezvous point, a quiet, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where nobody would notice you, where you could have a conversation without drawing attention. My eyes scanned the room as I stepped inside, my pulse quickening with each passing second. I spotted a man sitting alone in the back corner. He had his back to me, wearing a dark jacket and a cap that obscured his face. But something about him made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way he sat, motionless, observing everything. I approached cautiously, taking a seat, across from him without saying a word. The man didn't look up immediately. He took his time, sipping his coffee as though I wasn't even there. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he set the cup down and turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and there was no warmth in them. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I wasn't sure you would." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Who are you, and why should I trust you?" The man leaned back in his chair, almost smirking. "My name's David. I work in special projects. Let's just say I'm a consultant, of sorts. And as for trust, well, you've got no choice. You're in deep, Chris, deeper than you know. And if you don't understand that now, you will soon enough." My gut twisted with every word, but I couldn't back out. I needed to hear what he had to say. "What do you know about Mark? Where is he?" David leaned in slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "Mark is in trouble, big trouble. But that's not what you need to worry about right now. You've been dragged into something far bigger than you ever imagined." I clenched my fist beneath the table, trying to control the surge of frustration that threatened to boil over. "You're telling me Mark is in trouble? You think I don't know that? What I want to know is what the hell I'm tied up in. What's really going on here?" David exhaled slowly, as if weighing how much to reveal. "You're connected to something that isn't just business, Chris. It's a network. Harbinger Investments isn't just another shady firm. They run a series of high-risk ventures, some legal, some not. And Mark? He's been playing the game for a while. He's good at it, too good. But now he's taken too many risks. And now you're part of the fallout." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "What do you mean I'm part of the fallout? I don't even know what's going on." David's expression didn't change, but the air around him shifted. "When you signed those papers, you weren't just agreeing to a loan, Chris. You signed your name on contracts that tied you into a series of investments, most of which haven't even been launched yet. You're part owner whether you like it or not. The deal's bigger than you realize, and now you're a liability." I sat back, my mind spinning. "What kind of liability?" David leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "If Harbinger decides you're not useful, they'll take you down, they won't hesitate. But if you're smart, you can still get out of this. I can help you, but you need to listen." I was barely holding it together. "How can I trust you? For all I know, you're just another player in this mess." David gave a small, humorless chuckle. "Because I'm the only one who's been watching you closely enough to know where Mark's gone. And I know exactly how to get to him. If you want answers, I'm the only one who can give them to you. But you need to act fast. Every hour you waste makes things worse for you." The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was tangled in something far bigger than I ever imagined, and Mark had made sure of it. I had no idea who was really pulling the strings, but I knew one thing for sure. There was no way out without facing the truth. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "What do I need to do?" David slid a small envelope across the table toward me. "Inside that envelope is everything you need to know about the deal Mark signed you up for. You'll also find a way to contact me, but be warned, if you try to back out now, it'll only make things worse. Harbinger isn't a group you just walk away from. You need to be prepared." I hesitated, staring at the envelope. This was my chance to get answers, to figure out what the hell I was tangled in. But what did it mean to go all in now? What was the cost of getting involved with people like this? "Take it, Chris," David urged, his voice unwavering. "You don't have time to think anymore." I grabbed the envelope, my hands shaking. I was in deeper than I could have imagined. Mark had vanished, but this wasn't over. If I wanted to find him, and if I wanted to get out of this alive, I had no choice but to play the game. I left the cafe with a sense of urgency that felt alien to me. I had always been the calm one, the one who thought things through, who didn't rush into decisions. But everything was different now. The man sitting across from me had made it clear I was no longer in control. The deal I had signed without fully understanding it had already bound me to forces I couldn't escape. And now, the only way out was forward. Once I was in my car, I ripped open the envelope David had handed me. Inside, there was a set of papers, contracts, agreements and documents that laid bare the full extent of my involvement in Mark's business venture. My heart sank with every page I turned. There were numbers, names, and terms that seemed to blur together. But the one thing that stood out was the name of the company, Harbinger Investments. I had read about them in that article, but I had never realized just how deep they were into this deal. I wasn't just a passive investor. I was tied to a web of business dealings that stretched across borders, into markets that shouldn't have been touched by anyone with a conscience. There were debts tied to my name, properties that I didn't own but were now on my shoulders, and deals that Mark had orchestrated with people whose reputation was as murky as the deals they made. I pulled over to the side of the road, trying to calm my breathing. I had no idea what I was looking at. This wasn't just a simple loan or a startup gone wrong. This was a trap. Mark had known exactly what he was doing when he asked me to co-sign. He hadn't just asked me to back him up financially. He had set me up as the fall guy in a much larger, far more dangerous game. The last page of the documents was a legal contract, my signature on it, just as it had been on the loan papers. It detailed the consequences of defaulting on the payments, which were now my responsibility. But what caught my eye wasn't the financial terms. It was the final line, the one that marked me as a silent partner in every deal Mark had made under the umbrella of Harbinger Investments. My name was on everything, from the small, dubious loans to the large-scale international transactions that could make or break lives. The magnitude of it hit me like a wave. I wasn't just co-signed for a personal loan. I was involved in a web of illegal transactions, with no way out unless I played their game. And playing their game meant either fulfilling my obligations or running from the consequences. Both options felt impossible. I couldn't sit in my car any longer, paralyzed by the weight of the decision. I needed answers. I needed to find Mark. If there was any chance of making this right, I had to confront him, and fast. The phone call from David came shortly after I sat back behind the wheel. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "I know you're looking at the documents now. You're probably realizing just how deep this goes, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence between us was enough. "I wasn't kidding, Chris," David continued. "If you think you can walk away from this without consequences, you're wrong. Harbinger doesn't let people go. Not without getting what they need from you. The only way out is to play their game. And that means you need to get your hands dirty." I clenched my teeth. "What do you mean, get my hands dirty? I want out. I didn't ask for any of this." David's tone shifted, becoming more forceful. "That's exactly why you're in this mess. You didn't ask and you didn't pay attention. Now you're tied to it. If you want out, you'll have to prove you're worth more alive than dead to them. But remember, if Mark's pulled this kind of stunt, he's not the only one you have to worry about. I felt the weight of his words press into me like a vice. What do you want from me? I said, barely able to control my voice. Find Mark, David said simply. He's the key to everything. The documents you have in your hands, they're only the beginning. Harbinger wants him, and if they can't find him, they'll come for you next. The time to act is now. Find Mark, and you might just save yourself. Hung up the phone, the finality of his words reverberating in my mind. I had to find Mark. No more running, no more hiding. This was bigger than just saving my own skin. Mark had made a deal with forces I couldn't even begin to understand, and I had been dragged into it unwillingly. But now, my only option was to face the truth. I spent the next few hours tracing every step Mark had made in the last few months, every lead, every person he had interacted with. I didn't know how much time I had before things got out of hand, but I couldn't afford to waste another minute. I reached out to people I hadn't spoken to in years. I checked his social media accounts, his emails, his phone records. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. Mark had vanished off the grid. He was a ghost. And now I was chasing shadows. As I was about to give up for the night, I received a strange email. It was from an anonymous account, but the subject line made my heart stop. Mark's last move. I opened it immediately, my hands trembling. Inside was a single line of text. Check the warehouse on 5th Street, it's all there. I didn't know who had sent it. I didn't know if I could trust it, but it was the only lead I had left. I grabbed my jacket, determined to follow it through. Whatever I was walking into, I had no choice now but to face it. The address was simple. 5th Street, just a few miles away. But the feeling in the pit of my stomach told me that what lay ahead was anything but simple. The moment I left my apartment, I knew I was diving headfirst into something I wasn't prepared for. I drove quickly, but cautiously, the streets passing by in a blur as my mind raced. Who had sent the email? Was it someone involved with Mark's business dealings? Or was it someone trying to lure me into a trap I didn't know? And that uncertainty gnawed at me. But I had no choice but to follow the lead. If there was even the smallest chance that Mark had left something behind, anything to explain what the hell had happened, I had to check it out. The warehouse was located on the outskirts of town, in a part of the city that seemed long forgotten. The buildings around it were old, weathered, and clearly abandoned. As I pulled into the gravel lot, I noticed that the lights inside the warehouse were on. It looked like someone was waiting for me. My heart thudded in my chest, and a cold sweat began to form at the back of my neck. I parked my car and stepped out into the night air. It was eerily quiet. No sound but the faint hum of the city in the distance. I approached the warehouse, my footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement. The large metal door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open cautiously, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, filled with shadows. The air smelled old. Dust, oil, and something else I couldn't place. Hello? I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast, empty space. There was no response. I stepped inside, scanning the room. The walls were lined with boxes, crates, and stacks of paperwork. It looked like it had once been a storage facility, but now it was just a forgotten space filled with remnants of a business long past. But as I moved deeper into the warehouse, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A familiar figure standing in the far corner. It was Mark. Mark? I called, taking a step toward him. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. I walked closer, my breath coming quicker now. What was he doing here? Why hadn't he contacted me? Mark, it's me, Chris, I said, a little louder this time. Still nothing. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. He wasn't standing the way I remembered. His posture was wrong, stiff, unnatural. I was about to call out again when something caught my eye. A glint in the shadows near him, something metallic. And that's when I saw it. Mark was standing in front of a large steel barrel, his body slumped against it. His eyes were wide open, staring vacantly, but there was no life in them. His face was pale, almost ghostly. I froze, the blood draining from my face. I could feel my legs shaking as I took another step forward, the truth hitting me like a freight train. Mark wasn't just hiding here, he was dead. I felt the world tilt beneath me. My mind raced, and I stumbled back a few steps, my chest tightening. This wasn't what I had expected. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. This was a crime scene. And somehow I was standing right in the middle of it. My phone rang, breaking the silence like a slap to the face. I fumbled for it in my pocket, my hands trembling. When I saw the caller ID, I almost dropped it. It was David, the last person I wanted to hear from right now, I answered, my voice shaky. What the hell is going on, David? I just found Mark and he's... David's voice was calm. Too calm. I know, I figured you'd find him soon enough. He was always a step ahead of everyone. But you don't understand the full picture yet, Chris. Mark was never just a small player in this game. He was working. Both sides. Harbinger, yes, but also a lot of other people, dangerous people, and now he's crossed them. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. What are you talking about? What's going on here? Who killed him? David paused. I can't tell you that, not yet, but I can tell you this. Harbinger is involved, and if you want to survive this, you need to find out who they are working with. Mark made a mistake, and now it's your turn to fix it. I felt like the world had just dropped out from beneath me. What do you mean, my turn to fix it? My voice was rising in frustration. What the hell do you expect me to do now, David? Mark's dead. I'm tied to a business I don't even understand. I'm out of my depth here. David's voice softened just for a second. That's exactly why you're the one who has to clean this up, Chris. You signed the deals. You're marked. But you can still come out of this alive. If you play the game right. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what he was saying. Mark's body lay in front of me, and here I was, being told that it was up to me to fix whatever had gone wrong. I had already been dragged into this world, but now it seemed like there was no turning back. You have to find the truth, Chris, David continued. Harbinger won't stop until they get what they want. And you, my friend, are part of the deal now. Don't waste time. The people behind this won't wait much longer. You're in the middle of something that's bigger than you think. I could feel my heart pounding, my mind struggling to process it all. The dead weight of Mark's betrayal hung heavily in the air. The life I had known was crumbling in front of me. There was no easy way out. There never had been. The moment I hung up the phone, the weight of everything hit me all over again. Mark's lifeless body was right in front of me, and I had no idea. Who could have done this? All I knew was that whoever killed him wasn't done with me. I wasn't just a witness to this. It seemed I was now part of the problem. I was tied to a mess I hadn't created, and the more I tried to untangle myself from it, the more deeply I was enmeshed. I couldn't stand there in that cold, lifeless warehouse any longer. I needed to get out. But where could I go? How could I get away from them? I quickly left, trying not to look at Mark's body as I turned the corner of the building and stepped out into the alley. I had to act fast, but I had no idea what to do next. The authorities couldn't help me. Not yet, at least. I couldn't trust them, not with this level of danger involved. I had already seen too much, and Mark was dead. If I went to the police, now I would be pulled into an investigation I didn't understand. And as David had pointed out, Harbinger wasn't a group that just walked away from their business deals. They made sure you paid for your mistakes. I got into my car, feeling the tightness in my chest. My phone buzzed again. It was David. I didn't want to answer, but I knew I had no choice. What now? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Now, you start moving, Chris, David said, his tone serious. The game is on, and Harbinger won't wait. They'll be after you soon enough. You need to be one step ahead. I clenched my teeth, frustration boiling over. How am I supposed to be one step ahead? Mark is dead. I'm stuck in the middle of something I didn't ask for. I can't keep running from this. You don't have time for self-pity, David replied sharply. You need to find out who's really behind this. I told you, Mark was more involved than you know. The people who are pulling the strings won't stop at just him. They'll come for you next. You're not off the hook just because you found him. That was just the beginning. The coldness in David's voice sent a shiver down my spine. So what do you want me to do? How do I find out who did this to him? There's someone you can talk to, David said, lowering his voice. A contact inside Harbinger. He's been on the inside for years. He's your best shot at getting to the heart of what's really going on. I wasn't sure whether I should be relieved or terrified. And how am I supposed to get in touch with him? David gave me an address. He'll be at this location. I can't tell you much more, but when you meet him, don't ask questions. Just listen. He's the key to understanding everything. If you want to get Mark's killers and your own skin out of this alive, you need to know what he knows. I glanced at the address on my phone, biting my lip. And what do I owe this guy? Everything, David replied cryptically. You'll see when you meet him. I hung up the phone and looked at the address again. The location was a few miles away, deep in a part of town I didn't recognize. I didn't have much time to think. The longer I stayed in one place, the more likely it was that someone would come looking for me. I had already been marked as someone who knew too much, and I wasn't about to be next on the hit list. I started the engine, gripping the steering wheel as I drove toward the unknown. The weight of the past few hours hung over me like a cloud. Everything had shifted so quickly. Just a few days ago, I was helping a friend. Now I was tangled up in a web of dangerous business deals, shady investors, and a murder I couldn't make sense of. I arrived at the address just as the sun was setting, the streetlights flickering on in the dimming light. The place was tucked behind a row of warehouses, far removed from the busy parts of the city. It looked abandoned, but I could see a flicker of movement in one of the windows. I parked my car across the street and waited for a few minutes, trying to steady my nerves. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was filled with questions I didn't know how to answer. Eventually, the door to the building creaked open, and a tall figure stepped out. His silhouette was dark against the light from inside the building, but I could tell he was watching me. He didn't move, and I couldn't see his face, but the tension in the air told me this was the man David had mentioned. I stepped out of the car, my breath shallow. I didn't know what to expect, but I had come this far. There was no turning back now. As I walked toward the figure, he spoke, his voice gravelly. You Chris Turner? I nodded, trying to sound confident. Yeah. David told me you could help. Me? The man stepped closer, still keeping his face hidden in the shadows. You don't need help. You need answers. He handed me a small envelope. Inside it, you'll find a name. That's the person who can give you the truth about Mark's death. But don't waste time. Harbinger's not playing games anymore. I took the envelope from him, feeling the weight of it in my hands. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever this was going to reveal. Are you going to tell me anything else? I asked, hoping for more details. The man just shook his head. The less you know, the better. Trust me, you don't want to be too deep in this. I felt a cold shiver creep up my spine as I held the envelope. What does that mean? Who are you? He didn't respond, only turned, and walked back into the building. Before he disappeared inside, he called over his shoulder. Find the name. It's the only way out. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind swirling. Every step I took seemed to lead me further into the labyrinth that was Mark's life and death. With one last deep breath, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single name. Victor Wells. My blood ran cold. I had no idea who this person was, but if David was right, they were the key to everything. And if I was going to survive, I had no choice but to find him. The name Victor Wells felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't know why, but something about it sent a ripple of fear through me. It was just a name on a piece of paper, but it felt like a key to unlocking everything. Everything I had stumbled into without fully understanding the gravity of it. Victor Wells, the man who could give me the truth about Mark's death. But what truth? And who was this person who had remained hidden in the shadows of Mark's life? I stood there for a moment, processing the weight of it. The man who had handed me the envelope had vanished into the darkness, leaving me with nothing but questions. My hands shook as I stuffed the paper into my pocket. I didn't know what I was walking into, but at this point, I couldn't afford to hesitate. I had to find Victor Wells, now. The first thing I did was pull out my phone and search the name. Nothing came up. No social media profiles, no articles, no business dealings, no trace. The only thing I knew for sure was that Mark had gone to great lengths to keep this person hidden. If they were truly as involved in Mark's death as David suggested, they wouldn't be easy to find. But I had no choice but to try. I started with the basics, searching through old contacts, people Mark had worked with, anyone who might know him. Hours passed and the name Victor Wells continued to turn up nothing. I scrolled through every piece of information I had on Mark, trying to make sense of the puzzle. If Mark had been hiding something, then Victor Wells was the final piece. But I had to get there, quickly. It wasn't until late that night, after what felt like an endless search, that I got a hit. It was a tip from an anonymous email address, short and to the point. Victor Wells, East Side Warehouse, midnight. My heart raced. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The only problem was that it was already 11:30 p.m. The warehouse was on the far side of town, deep in a district that made me feel more like I was entering the lion's den than going to a meeting. I grabbed my jacket, my mind made up. This was it. No more waiting, no more trying to piece things together in the dark. I was going to face this head on, whether I was ready or not. As I drove, my mind churned with the possibilities. What could Victor Wells tell me that I didn't already know? What was his role in all this? Why had Mark gotten involved with someone like him? And why had he left me to pick up the pieces? By the time I arrived at the warehouse, it was well past midnight. The cold air cut through me as I stepped out of the car, scanning the area. It was as empty and eerie as it had been earlier in the evening when I had met David. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic. The door to the warehouse was slightly ajar, just like before. I hesitated for a moment, but there was no turning back now. I pushed the door open. Inside, it was darker than I remembered. The warehouse was full of shadows, each corner hiding something I couldn't see. I could hear faint voices in the distance, but it wasn't clear if they were human or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Victor Wells, I called out, my voice carrying across the empty space. A figure stepped from the shadows and I instinctively took a step back. The man who stood in front of me was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a hat that obscured his features. But his eyes were clear, cold and calculating. The air around him felt like it was charged with tension. "I take it you're Chris Turner," he said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "Yeah," I replied, my voice tight with unease. "And you're Victor Wells?" He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "I am, and you've been looking for me, haven't you?" I took a deep breath. "I need answers. About Mark, about everything that's been happening. I'm stuck in a mess that I didn't sign up for." Victor stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate. "You're in deeper than you realize, Chris. You don't just get pulled into something like this by accident. Mark was smart, too smart for his own good, and now you're the one who has to clean up the mess." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean? What happened to Mark?" Victor's expression didn't change. Mark was always a player, but he overplayed his hand. He made enemies, powerful enemies. And when those enemies come after you, they don't stop until they get what they want. Mark wasn't as careful as he thought. That's why he's gone. Words hit me like a slap in the face. "You're saying Mark, he was murdered?" Victor didn't answer immediately. He looked around the warehouse, as though making sure no one was listening. "Let's just say Mark's death was a warning. You're involved now, whether you like it or not. And if you want out, you'll need to make a choice." "A choice?" I repeated, confused. Victor's eyes locked onto mine. "You can either play along with Harbinger and keep your hands clean, or you can try to get out. But the cost of trying to walk away will be higher than you think." I felt the weight of his words sink in. It was clear now, there was no easy way out of this. But there had to be a way. I couldn't let Mark's death be for nothing. I couldn't let myself become a pawn in some twisted game where people like Victor and Harbinger pulled all the strings. "Where do I go from here?" I asked, my voice hardening with resolve. "How do I make this right?" Victor smirked. "You don't. But you might be able to survive if you play it smart. Mark's death was just the beginning of a much bigger game. You want answers, Chris? You'll have to earn them." My heart raced as Victor turned away, disappearing into the darkness of the warehouse. But before he disappeared completely, he turned back to face me one last time. "There's a price for everything, Chris," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And you're about to find out what yours is." Victor's words lingered in my mind as I left the warehouse. His cold, calculated voice echoed, and I could almost feel the weight of the decisions I was being forced to make. Every step I took Toward my car felt heavier than the last. The reality of my situation closing in on me. There was no escaping this world I had been thrust into. No going back to the life I had once known. Mark's death had been a warning, and I was the next target. But I couldn't afford to panic. I had to think. I had to find a way to outsmart them. Whatever game I had been pulled into, I needed to play it better than they had planned. I spent the next few days in a haze of confusion and fear, trying to piece together the puzzle of Mark's life and death. The more I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just about Harbinger. It was about something much bigger. Mark had gotten involved with people who had connections everywhere, in business, in government, in places that no one could touch. And now I was part of it. I wasn't sure what I could do to change my fate, but the urgency was clear. Time was running out. I kept replaying Victor's words in my mind. You're either in or you're out, Chris. And if you try to get out, it'll cost you more than you think. I couldn't go back to the police. I couldn't trust anyone. Harbinger had too many eyes everywhere, and I was just one more pawn. I had to get ahead of them. But how? Then it hit me. The one thing they didn't count on, the one thing I had that they couldn't control. The documents, the contracts I had signed, the papers Mark had left behind. They weren't just my chain. They were the key to everything. I knew I had to get those documents into the right hands. But who could I trust? Who could I turn to in a world where everyone had a hidden agenda? I called in the only person I could think of, Thomas, my old lawyer, the one person who had seen the worst side of my life and still stuck around. We hadn't talked in months, but in a moment like this, I needed him. I needed someone who knew how to play the game the right way, someone who could help me navigate the nightmare I was living in. I don't know if you'll be able to help me, Thomas, I said when he answered the phone. But I need you to. Listen, I'm in way over my head. It's not just a loan or a business deal. Mark's dead. I've been pulled into something bigger, something dangerous, and I need to get these documents in front of the right people. I need your help. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. Then finally, he spoke. I've been expecting your call, Chris, Thomas said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of experience. You're in deep, no question. Harbinger isn't just a name, it's a network, a dangerous one. I've heard things, seen things that make me wonder if they're untouchable. But that's not what matters now. You want to play this smart? I'll help you, but you have to be ready to go all in. No halfway moves. I clenched my jaw, feeling a surge of relief that I had someone who understood. I don't know how far I can go, Thomas, but I can't let them win. I can't let Mark's death be for nothing. I'll meet you tomorrow. Bring the documents. I'll know what to do, he said, then hung up. The next day, I met Thomas in his office. It was quiet, calm, a stark contrast to the chaos running through my head.